Thank you, Paula. So let's turn this over to Chris and we'll get started because we would like to have the presentation and plenty of time for people to talk and ask questions too.
Great, and I'm just going to presume you guys can see the slide. Can you see it? I've got it on.
We
screen.
can
Okay,
see
good.
it, Chris.
Okay, first of all, I just want to say that I am so proud to be still connected programmatically with Future Church, even in just a bit of a way with our Save Our Parish community effort, which got started way back in 2006. Second of all, I want to let you all know I'm working on a book about Sister Kate Kunstler, the pioneering canon lawyer who really changed, along with a whole bunch of vibrant, incredible parishioners, changed how the Vatican was responding to wholesale massive closings of priests. So the first part, I'm really going to talk about the history of how we went from the Vatican rubber stamping every decision made by a US bishop to suddenly people appealing and finally winning and being able to keep their parishes and their churches open. So before I do that, just want to bear with me, I didn't do slides for this. Brief statistics. Between 2000 and 2020, the number of US priests decreased by 23%, going from 45,000 to 35,000 in 20 years. And in 2020, because of aging, 65% of diocesan priests, only 65% were engaged actively in ministry. Yet, the number of parish-connected US Catholics over the same time period increased by 7.8 million, so that we're now up to 67.7 million in 2020. These statistics are all from the Center for Applied Research on the Apostolate in Georgetown. So, for far too many bishops, the easy solution has been to shrink the number of parishes to fit the number of priests. And the trend has been to herd Catholics into ever larger churches. And to do this, bishops have been merging financially viable and ministerially effective parish communities, and in many cases, hoping to sell their churches. Between 2000 and 2020, US bishops closed 2,533 parishes for a 13% decline overall. And usually the preponderance of the closures are affecting small, socially conscious parish communities that serve low-income neighborhoods. If they're in a city or in a rural area, they are really the social gathering network for all of the surrounding farming community. Okay, I'll go on with our slides then, how to keep parishes open at a time with fewer priests. And Deb, were you going to do this part? This is
I can do it. Also I did was put together just very quickly. Okay. Since this is really focused quite a bit, and we're hopeful that this will be useful to people who aren't from the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, because these processes are oftentimes similar. But what we know from the Beacons of Light process is that eventually it looks to that he could close 70% of the parishes eventually in the Archdiocese. It's a big Archdiocese, but 70% of the parish closing is a big deal for us to consider. And if you look at how other people are looking at what's happening in Cincinnati, they are wondering if this is going to be the model for all other kinds of for bishops to use going forward. So we know that he formally announced this in July. We know that Father Jan Schmidt is leading this process. And so, you know, the maps went up, and he gave a period of October 1 through October 20 to send feedback on the plan. So if you haven't already, everybody that's on this call should at the very least, get onto the website and offer some feedback. I will give you some links to 2 letters that we have templates for. One is to offer feedback If you don't have something already input, it's just suggestions. And then another is for a more formal canonical stake in the ground, if you will, after the feedback period is over. So I just wanted to sort of just give an overview of how radical this is, not only for the Archdiocese, but it's actually a radical reordering for if it's used as a model for the entire US Church. So it's important what we do about this.
Thanks, Deb. Okay, so I'm going to give a bit of the history. In 2004, the Archdiocese of Boston was really ground zero for the whole effort to close parishes and sell churches as an outcome of the clergy sex abuse scandal. And as a result, after Cardinal Law was pretty much run out of town, Auxiliary Bishop Richard Lennon suppressed 83 parishes with a plan to close their church. All assets of the closed parishes and churches were to revert to the Archdiocese. And even though the Archdiocese insisted that none of that money would ever be used to pay clergy sex abuse, in fact, in 2008, after 5 years of appeals, the Vatican basically acknowledged that they had to do it because they were on the verge of bankruptcy. The 83 suppressed parishes led to massive round-the-clock vigils. Boston citizens just rose up. They had occupations, 24-hour prayers. They started canonical appeals. The outcry was so strong that initially 12 parishes, the Archdiocese reversed itself and allowed 12 parishes to stay open over the next 18 months. Another 15 appealed to the Apostolic Signatura, which is the highest Supreme Court. It went through the process of clergy and then Signatura, but unfortunately, after a 10-year saga in 2014, the last appealing parish from Boston lost. And certainly all the early, and this was like a shock wave, I would say, went across the United States. I would say that, just a little factoid, the Archdiocese projected to realize a $200 million from the sale of churches, but when everything was done and said, it only was 67 million. And so anyway, and I would say Cardinal Malley listed these 3 reasons why the configurations were needed: a decline in mass attendance, see if they sound familiar, a decline in mass attendance, demographic shifts of Catholics moving to suburbs, financial problems, and a declining number of priests. In actuality, because of the clergy sex abuse crisis exploding in Boston and then dioceses all over the United States, there were many other US bishops that followed Boston's lead by merging vital and viable parishes and trying to sell the churches. It solved 2 problems. One, there was a desperate need to raise money to pay attorney fees and settlements. And 2, bishops did not have enough priests to staff their parishes anyway. And so I will say it was right at this point that the Future Church Board said we have to do something. And that's when we started the Save Our Parish community effort. Okay, the next point in the timeline is 2006, because you will see as this unfolds that there were things that happened in the US and then the Vatican responds, and something happens in the US and the Vatican responds. And I'm just saying this because so much of the time, most of us think it doesn't matter what we do, they're going to get their way. Well, this is a perfect example of why it is so important for us as ordinary Catholics, baptized Catholics, to own our rights and responsibilities under canon law. In any case, in 2006, because of all the money from the closures going to the Archdiocese, the prefect of the Congregation of Clergy wrote a letter to USCCB President Skilstead to say that the US dioceses were wrongly invoking canon law, Canon 123, because he wrote in this letter, quote, "Only with great difficulty can one say that a parish becomes extinct. A parish is extinguished by the law itself only if no Catholic community any longer exists in its territory, or if no pastoral activity has taken place for 100 years. So this goes to the whole point is your parish has a right to exist, and that right is protected under canon law. The second point that Skelsted wrote, or that Hoyos wrote to the US bishops, was to tell them that most cases, what they were calling these quote unquote suppressions, were actually mergers. And for that reason, the assets and liabilities of each parish should go to the parish with whom it was merged. So, and not to the diocese. Now that was a big step because right there, you know, it was sort of taking away at least a little bit of incentive. The next key moment in this unfolding saga of Vatican rubber stamping whatever the bishop wanted to close parishes and churches to people winning at least some cases is the story of the rural St. Mary Jamesville parish in upstate New York and Syracuse. And there is a severe priest shortage in Syracuse. The diocese wanted to reduce the parishes from 175 to 134 that would be served by fewer than 100 priests. It's even worse now. They've had to redo it all again. St. Mary Jamesville was the only church parish in its community. It was vibrant. It had 535 registered families. Over 500 people attended 2 weekend masses. It had a food pantry. It had an active parish education program for the children. It was solvent. It had no debts. However, the diocese decided to merge it with a parish that was carrying something ridiculous like $6,000 monthly debt payment. So this was a parish that had a debt. It was 15 minutes away. And in this part of New York where the weather is so bad, would make it hard for quite a few people to get to the new parish. In any case, just note, we've got a vital solvent parish being merged with an indebted parish. And this is another pattern you will often see as dioceses bring in these decisions about who's going to merge with whom. Very often the parish with assets will be merged with a parish that's struggling because the parish that's struggling has back due payments owed to the diocese. And so the diocese will get, once the parishes are merged, the liabilities are also merged. And so the diocese will get the money from the parish that had the assets. Okay, I hope it's not too confusing. In any case, St. Mary Jamesville is, again, a wonderfully vital, vibrant, smart community. Some of them were teachers at Lemoyne College. They filed administrative recourse in Rome. And even though there were predictions from church pundits that this was doomed to fail, and Father Tom Rees was quoted in saying, quote, "The Vatican's not interested in arguments like this is a wonderful parish. They only are concerned whether proper canonical procedures will follow." And nobody thought it was worth it. It would ever work. But these folk felt it was the right thing to do, so they did it. And when you know, in 2010, they were the first appeal that was granted a full hearing at the Vatican High Court, the Apostolic Signatura. In 2011, they received, quote, "a precedent-setting decision reversing the lower court ruling," and the Vatican told the bishop that St. Mary Jamesville Church must remain a worship site. However, the parish was still merged. So this led to another problem because now the bishop is the one who can make the decision when worship can happen at St. Mary Church in Jamesville, New York. And these folks were hoping they would be able to get back to weekly mass, which never happened. And they still tried to close down the church. It's a lot of sort of ugly in church politics. They had to go back to the Vatican repeatedly to make the bishop and the pastor keep the church open. And so what's happening now, it is still open as a worship site, but worship just happens there once or twice a year. The next sort of point in this saga is St. Vincent Pallotti Parish in Camden, which is in Haddonville Township. It's more of an urban parish. And actually, this parish appeal led to the cascades. This is the linchpin upon which subsequent victories, from which subsequent canonical appeal victories came. And again, all of this information is from my work with Kate Kinsler, and I've interviewed people at both Camden and St. Mary Jamesville. So a little bit backstory. Once again, the Camden Diocese was looking at a massive diocesan reconfiguration of going 124 parishes to 66. And again, it was saying that they expect to have fewer than 85 active priests available in 2015 to serve 500,000 Catholics. In fact, that did not bear out. They had more priests, but that's an aside. So in any case, St. Vincent Pallotti this is your ideal parish. This is kind of the parish everybody dreams about belonging to. It was vibrant, it was vital. It had 38 active ministries. It had worshipers that came from 34 zip codes in New Jersey and Philadelphia. It was led by a dynamic pastor who also happened to be physically disabled, who had really turned the place around and had no parish council, no nothing when he got there in 2002. And suddenly, because of his dynamism and lay empowerment, it just bloomed. He also, this pastor simultaneously, and this was key to this whole thing, had served as the director of development of the diocese. He had conducted a capital campaign and raised over $1 million to redo the rectory, which had toxic mold, and create a parish community, a parish center. And all of that was dedicated. And then 4 months later, Bishop Galante announced his plan to merge the parish and make another substandard parish. It didn't have parking and stuff, the parish seat, which left St. Vincent Pallotti parish properties vulnerable to being sold, because once you are no longer a parish, you lose a lot of your parish rights. Now, the other key to this one is that the parish sat on land owned by the Archdiocese that was worth $27 million, and Galante wanted the land. This so outraged Monsignor Marucci, the pastor, because he had just done this capital campaign and had all these naming rights, all this civil stuff. So of course, they appealed. He did everything he could. They were just huge numbers of letters back and forth to Galante to try to get him to change his mind. The deal was, though, Bishop Galante refused to issue any decrees. He was going to issue all of them once the reconfiguration was finished. And the problem without issuing any decrees for merger is that it denies the parishioners the right to appeal the decision. And so it was a very complex case. Monsignor Marucci found Kate because he wanted someone who had no affiliation with any diocese, any place. And anyway, over a period of time, they appealed in August 2008. It was denied, but in fact, it was clear if they had like 5 binders in their appeal. Most of them aren't that big, but in fact, they were able to show that clergy had never read it. In April 2010, it did get to the Apostolic Signatura, which did not take the case because there were no decrees, and because Galante had still not released the decrees. You have to have a decree to start the appeal. But the Signatura issued a ruling saying that if you should decide to come back, you will be heard without prejudice, which is sort of like canon law code for saying you're likely to win if you come back. And sure enough, what happened is that in October 2010, Bishop Galante reversed himself and allowed the parish to become the parish seat. But it only happened probably because there was a simultaneous civil appeal. They had like 8 lawyers on their appealing committee, and which the Diocese of Camden was likely to lose. And at this point, Kate wrote a letter to Burke and basically said, if you want to save the good face of the bishops in the United States, you can change that in a minute by telling Bishop Galante he cannot sell the church and he must keep it open. And 2 weeks later, he reversed himself. So anyway, Kate, we were always proud of this because it was in October 2010 that this decision was made, and subsequent decisions then changed after that, because again, I have this 2008 to 2011 because these appeals started in 2008, but they didn't get decided in 2011. And this was right at, now the Camden appeal did not get wide publication because the bishop just sort of changed his mind. And anyway, by 2011, we have a huge shift with 13 churches in Allentown, Springfield, Massachusetts, and the Buffalo Diocese winning their appeals. This just never happened. It was called a landmark change by Nicholas Caffardi, who's a canon law expert at Duquesne. This is one of those Solomon kinds of decisions, because Rome was trying to thread the needle here. It upheld the bishop's suppression of the parishes in Allentown, Springfield, and Buffalo, but ruled that their churches must remain open as worship sites. Now, see, the thing with this for bishops is, why would you suppress the parish community that's supplying the money to keep the churches open if you, because you're, so it was a way of putting the brakes on some of the stuff that the bishops were trying to do, okay? Because they still would have to have all the expenses of maintaining the churches. So that was a huge little landmark on the way to, where we are now. The next landmark place, a key point, is what happened in Cleveland. And oh, I hate it when I do this. Okay. Well, lo and behold, in 2006, we get who else but the same guy who did all the closings in Boston. Bishop Richard Lennon is sent to Cleveland after our bishop retired. He arrived in 2006. We had already had in Cleveland a lengthy, vibrant parish life process. We have a wonderful pastoral planning office that was nationally known for all of their skills for organizational development of parish leadership. That office knew everybody in the diocese. They were widely respected by the priests. They were the ones who were running the vibrant parish life configuration. Bishop Pilla valued parish communities, and his goal was to keep as many of them open as he could in Cleveland. He started this Church in the City initiative where suburban parishes supported urban parishes. The original intent of the vibrant parish life process was to see how more of this could be happening so people could share staff, share programs, because Cleveland too was faced with a big priest shortage, and we had the same reasons. However, when Bishop Lennon, at the time, maybe thought maybe 1 or 2 or maybe as many as 10 parishes might close. But when Bishop Lennon came, he changed the whole intent to reconfiguring. Everybody was in clusters and you had to vote which parish was gonna close in your cluster. It was really a very destructive process. In 2009, he FedExed his letters to 52 parishes announcing that they would close and their churches would close. In this case, the assets, he didn't say in the letter, he did say in the letter how soon you had to get your appeal in if you were going to appeal it, because in the meantime, future churches sending out information to everybody all over the diocese. But as in most places, nobody wants to think your bishop is going to sell you down the river, In any case, 2 of those closings were reversed immediately. 13 parishes later appealed. They joined together across parish lines in this group called Endangered Catholics. We were sending them out. Kate wrote like the canonical sort of guidebook to walk people through it. But it wasn't until, and there's a lot of stuff in between, like we had an apostolic visitation from Rome because the bishop was so not easy to get along with. That would be the nicest way to say it. Anyway, in 2012, lo and behold, the Congregation of Clergy upheld all the appeals of every parish who appealed, not only for the church closures, but also for the parish closures. So the bishop was instructed to reopen all of the parishes that he had closed. There's so much Vatican politics going on, and well, it was more like Lenin politics, because he was a protege of Cardinal Law. Cardinal Law was in Rome. Cardinal Law sat on the Congregation for Bishops, and in fact, he sat on the Congregation for Clergy. So what the deal was, Rome had asked Bishop Lenin he had made a mistake. He was a self-taught canon lawyer, and he thought of himself that way, and he touted himself that way. But in fact, he did not know what he was doing, because his letter basically closed the parish and closed the church all in one line. By this time, the Vatican had made it clear that there were two processes, you had to issue one decree for closing the church, one decree for merging the parish. Each decree had to be individualized, and each decree had to give reasons why this happened. The Vatican, the Congregation for Clergy, wrote back and said to Lenin that he needed to do this for these 12 appeals, and he just blew them off. He paid no attention. So it took like a 2-year process, and but finally they did issue it. And when they issued it, though, it was released to the media before it was released to the bishop. And it's sort of the Vatican's way of playing pushback, you know. So the sad part is, if every parish in Cleveland had appealed, they would have all won. So most bishops have hopefully learned from that, not to try to do it all in one thing, but you never know. So that, so after the Cleveland victories in 2012, Kate wrote her commentary on what had happened. And there were 3 things that she named in her commentary that were no longer acceptable to the Vatican for closing a church. This is a church. You have to show a grave reason to close a church. Canon law favors the bishop when it comes to suppressing the parish, but it favors the parishioners when it comes to preserving the church. Just a little factoid there. Anyway, 3 of the things that Kate mentioned were the lack of clergy was no longer a grave enough reason to close a church. Demographic decline was no longer a grave enough reason to close and sell a church. And the grave financial state of the diocese was no longer a grave reason. So as you can see, in 2013, the Congregation for Clergy finally issues procedures for modifying parishes. Because the fact of the matter is, when Kate started working with St. Mary Jamesville Parish back in 2007, nobody had any idea how to go about defending parish rights. Partly because all the canon laws about parishes were all over the books of canon law. There are like 3 books of canon law. So it was a matter of pulling it together and seeing what they would buy. And again, Rome was very invested in just rubber stamping what the bishops did. At one point during the Camden decrees, there was a scandal because the nephew of the Vatican Secretary of State, Sodano, was in partnership with a guy by the name of Raphael Folieri, who actually was Anne Hathaway's boyfriend. And Folieri was running a business to sell church lands, and he had a contact in the Congregation of Clergy that would give him a heads up about which parishes were coming on the market so he could be ready to snatch them up. He ended up getting indicted by the FBI for fraud and spent 4 years in jail. But his cohort at the Vatican was pretty much named an unindicted co-conspirator. Sometimes I think I should be writing a novel instead of a history book. So any case, just some of the backstory about stuff that was going on. But in any case, so it was let's see what we can do here. We have to do something. And finally, I honestly think it was Kate's letter to Cardinal Burke that finally sort of woke people up over there, because it was shortly after that we started getting the changes. So anyway, the Congregation for Clergy issues procedures in 2013, clarifying you need 2 separate canonical decrees, one for suppressing or merging a parish, another for closing its church in preparation for sale. And again, the bishop should not had a grave reason to sell the church. The 3 reasons: no lack of clergy, demographic decline, and grave financial state of the diocese. I just want to note that in 2013, it did not apply these 3 criteria to parish suppressions and mergers. However, just last year, in 2020, the Congregation for Clergy issued an instruction, which canon lawyers tell me is not a law, but it is information for how to apply the law. And you know what? I should have said this right at the beginning. I'm not a canon lawyer. What you're getting is an informed opinion from someone who's been working with canon lawyers for a long time. So anyway, in any case, the 2020 clergy instruction spells out reasons a bishop cannot close a parish now, not just a church. And it listed the same 3 things: lack of clergy, demographic decline, and grave financial state of the diocese. Furthermore, and I don't have everything that's in there, but I can give you the link. It's on the Vatican website. It encourages parishes to keep churches with a grouping of parishes. And I want to note, it talked a grouping of parishes. It did not talk about having 6 parishes become 1 canonical parish. And I think that's going to be key when it comes to Cincinnati. And it also outlines situations where 1 priest may be responsible for such a grouping. And again, that goes into the clustering and stuff like that for the sacramental ministry. Deb's going to get more into how we can keep people open. So what are some of the applications to Cincinnati? Well, for one thing, Cincinnati is going through a drastic downsizing, merging 211 parishes into 60 parish families that will be served by 113 priests. From what I read on the documents from the Archdiocese, the ultimate goal is that those 211 those 60 groupings will eventually, each of them, become 1 canonical parish. So we're shrinking parishes here. Now, there are difficulties with that. Excuse me. One is you lose your canonical right to do any appealing as a parish once you're merged. And 2, you're going to lose a lot of leverage for hanging on to your church. Now, this could be very important for people in rural Ohio. And I grew up in Lima, Ohio, by the way. So I get rural Ohio, for whom, and it's not as much in Lima, but I think it is more true in other places, where their parish is sort of a locus for what the social life of the community. Well, certainly we saw this at St. James in Kansas, Ohio, where, anyway, that's another story. I hope it will come out and talk. But the thing for Cincinnati is that's puzzling to me is there's no financial crunch here, So I don't know what, and people in Cincinnati can tell me, because it looks as if people have been using clustering for a while. So I just think it's important to think outside the box, because in the long haul, the faith community comes first. The faith community, priests come from faith communities, not the other way around. So we need to have some kind of priority given to the integrity of the faith community, not just shrinking it to fit the priests we have. The second part of Cincinnati is, again, the whole issue as I see it is to ask, when will the decrees be issued? As I read the information, some decisions are going to be made by the end of November. And, it's got all this nice language about each parish family will be making the decisions about what's going to happen with the real estate and the parishes. But the fact of the matter is, under canon law, Archbishop Schnoor has to issue separate decrees for merging every single parish that's going to be merged, which is 211 of them, it looks like to me. And if and when the time comes down the road, so to speak, that any given parish family decides they want to close and sell a church, Archbishop Schnoor also must issue a decree for that. Now, why is this important? It's important because with either a merger decree or a church sale decree, the timeline starts, and parishioners have only 10 calendar days to get an appeal in, a letter into the bishop saying they disagree with that. And that's that's a marker. And again, we'll get this to the next time, but canon law always wants people to work things out locally if you possibly can. So your first letter has to go into the bishop that you disagree within 10 days, and it should be, proof of delivery and all like that. And then the bishop has 30 days to respond. And then if he doesn't respond, that's a no, okay? So that after 30 days of no response, that's when you start the next step. And usually while you're waiting for his response, people are preparing their decree to go to the congregation for clergy. This may not be where any of you guys are, and I don't want to even push that or force you there. I just want to outline what's involved with the process, okay? So it's conceivable that the merger decrees could be issued at the end of November. That said, because that's when the timeline starts. And so whenever that happens, and very often bishops are not forthcoming about when they issue the decrees. Cardinal Dolan stonewalled for 6 months, he would not issue the decrees. And we had probably at least 15 parishes in the Archdiocese of New York who were trying to appeal and couldn't until he issued the decrees. And so they did anyway, because they had to get the time marker in there. But Kate had to go to the Vatican and make him finally post the decrees. So just a little bit of backstory of what's happened to other places. And I would hope and trust that the Archdiocese would be forthcoming about when the merger decrees will be issued, because you have a right to give your feedback. And of course, then the question is, when will the church relegations be issued? I think we have to be quite concerned about the integrity of rural parishes who will not, at least in my experience, what I've seen certainly at St. Mary's, St. James, Kansas, a couple of other places, when the Catholic Church in the small town goes, a large number of people will go to the Protestant church. They're lost to the church altogether. There was a study done by the Council on Pastoral Planning and Council Development that showed that some 40% of merged parishes lost some 40% of parishioners. I'm pretty sure it's in the information that Deb will send out, so you can see that. So we're talking losing Catholics here. We're not, it's been shown. And of course, then the integrity and ministry of urban parishes that are often providing important ministries to neighborhoods that need it the most. And I know Cincinnati has its share, just as Cleveland did. Okay, I think I'm done. Okay, over to you, Deb.
So Chris, I'm just going to go through this pretty quickly and hand it back to you, because we're already 45 minutes in, and I know you have a little bit more. But will you just, instead of us messing around, will you just move this for me?
Sure.
So one of the biggest tool that we have in our toolkit is Canon 517.2. And basically there are books written on this. There's, I don't know if you can even, if we're still looking at Chris, or if you can see me, but bottom line is that their 517.2 says that if, because of a shortage of priests, the bishop can appoint somebody else to run a parish. And so I think in this case, we need to really press forward with that, with Archbishop Schnoor. We in a world where in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, where the number of priests is going to continue to decline, we need to find another way to keep parishes open. And parish life coordinators are one, sort of ministry that does that. And we actually know that in 2004, there were 616 parishes that were administered by parish life coordinators through 115 dioceses throughout the country. Now, you'll see in some of my slides that for a lot of reasons, the bishops have not used it, and its use has been on the decline because bishops are hesitant. Which is another reason it's important for us to push forward on that. So Chris, if you move forward on the next slide. So Canon 517.2 is, you may all know this or you may not. I wasn't aware of it until I started working for Future Church. So maybe you're all more understanding of this, but this is rooted in baptism. It was part of the 1983 revised Code of Canon Law. And it's basically there because there is this conviction that the mission of the church is the right and duty of all believers, including those of us who are doing a lot of that daily work. And so it affirms this calling in various ministerial areas, including catechesis, liturgy, care of the souls. There's this little bit of canon law about who has the full care of the souls, which is the priest. But nonetheless, in the practical day-to-day work, a parish life coordinator can really take up the role of leading a parish forward in some very important ways and keep that parish alive and vibrant. And there are studies that saying that when these parish life coordinators are in place, that the parish actually grows. It's actually more vibrant. So there's a lot of reason for us to say this is, put our stake in the ground and say, Archbishop Schnur or whichever diocese you're in, this is an important ministry and we need to invoke this instead of merging and closing parishes. So Chris, next one. And just a few stories, and I'll go through this just very quickly. But so Sister Marianne Cody was, she was appointed parish life coordinator after the Bishop Bambera in Scranton or Pittsburgh had, or maybe it's Scranton, had closed 69 parishes. And so he decided that instead of closing this one, he would install the first parish life coordinator. And so she provided, and she was already well known to the parish. She was beloved, she was trusted. And so she provided the day-to-day pastoral leadership. And as the bishop described her, faithful witness, wise teacher, and servant leader. So, they had a priest who provided the sacramental ministry, but she provided the leadership for the parish and kept that parish strong. And so it's in 10 years, the diocese projects that it will have fewer than 100 priests, even though there's a slight uptick in seminary enrollment. So it's all the more important that we begin to use these lay people as parish life coordinators, whether they be religious nuns. Deacons can also take that place, but that's an important part of this work going forward, right? And I'm not even talking about like our dreams. If anybody here thinks we ought to have married priests or women priests or anything like that, this is what's possible right now under canon law. I'm not arguing for anything else. Canon law already allows for this. So we have a tool right now that we can press our Archbishop to use. You can go to the next one, Chris. And Sister Kate, after this decision was made, she said, now the bishop sees that merging parishes does not fix the growing reality. And that's true in Cincinnati too. The reason I use these things is because we can take this wisdom and remember it for our own archdiocese. Now alternative leadership styles are being implemented, and it's about time bishops do this. You can go to the next one, Chris. And Bishop Bambera said, the church calls us to consistently invite our people to ministry and mission in the church, not just priests, not just our deacons, all the people of God. So this was a very good solution in his parish. Next one. And just recently Commonweal shared a story about Eleanor Sowers. Now, Eleanor was in like the insurance business for years. And so she's a lay woman who got a degree at Fordham finally. But after she was very close to their parish priest, and then after he died in March of 2018, Frank Caggiano, who's actually, I wouldn't call him progressive at all, but he's a very thoughtful man, very practical man. And so he was looking for the next priest to appoint at her parish, at this parish. And he decided after some talking with her and other parish leaders that he would actually appoint her as the parish life coordinator. And so she has been appointed there, and she's doing all this work that a priest would have done. She's ministering to families, ministering to individuals. And although the priest presided all the liturgies and the weddings and the baptisms, all that, she's making all the plans with families. She's holding their hands. She's with them through all this. She is very pastoral in St. Anthony of Padua. Next one, Chris. And so Boston also, after their disastrous closing of so many parishes, in 2012, they organized 288 parishes into collaboratives, which sort of sounds like maybe what Schnur wants to do, Archbishop Schnur wants to do. But here's the important part of this. Each parish retains its own canonical and civil integrity with separate finance councils, bank accounts, assets, and liabilities. That is the problem with what looks like is going to happen in Cincinnati, according to what's on the Beacons of Light page. So that's the reason I wanted to point this out, that even though they are sharing resources, sharing ministers, and sharing, people across parish boundaries, what they have done is they have maintained their own parish. And that's really important for us, because if this problem isn't going to be solved in future years because the number of priests are going to decline, we want to keep our foot in the door and keep parishes open until we're able to develop or organically find new ways for parishes to be led and stay open. Next slide. So the parish life coordinators, I said, this is one statistic, really 616 parish life coordinators parishes were entrusted to someone other than a priest. And so it's kind of surprising. And if you go to the next slide, Chris, I think that even though there's this shortage of priests, okay, you'll see that there's a shortage of priests. This shows the decline of all priests. Go to the next one. There's a decline in the active priests. All these, numbers are sliding in the same direction. Next one. The ordinations are down. There may be some uptick, but it's still never going to be enough in the future to serve the number of Catholics that we need to serve and the number of parishes we need to serve. Next one, Chris. But what we have, this glorious gift in the church, is this huge boom in people becoming deacons, becoming lay pastoral ministers, becoming lay ecclesial ministers. So lay people are upticking. And so the solution to keeping parishes open is in our lay people. Next slide. But you'll see when we have this, Canon 517.2 led parishes up until 2016, and this downtrend continues, all of a sudden, bishops decided not to use them, and it's down to something like 200 and some now. So, and this came out recently in some of the Vatican's recent documents on parishes. But while they're saying we need lay people to take up their roles, they're also worried. Somebody's worried. I don't know if it's Francis, but somebody is worried about lay people taking over priest roles. And so we have this huge problem there. We've created this huge hole where, the numbers of priests are going down, the number of lay people who are trained are going way up. And yet bishops have been more and more hesitant to use them. And that's part of what we hope to change as we look at the Cincinnati situation. Next slide. Okay, that's on to you now, Chris.
Okay, so just a lot of what I'm going to talk about here actually came from a book by James Corydon that you can still get, Father James Corydon, The Parish and Catholic Tradition. And Father Jim Corydon was one of the 3 general editors of the Code of Canon Law. So this guy knows what he's talking about. He was a renowned professor on the faculty of Washington Theological Union. This book, The Parish, and he wrote a lot of other books, but this is the one that applies to us. First appeared, The Parish and Catholic Tradition is the name of it, in 1997. It first appeared. It was the first pastoral and practical guide for Catholics trying to understand how canon law applied to parishes. His theoretical guidebook outlined ways of claiming and vindicating parish rights using the administrative recourse process, which is what we call appeals, but it's the administrative recourse procedure is the official name. However, until Sister Kate began working with beleaguered parishioners in 2006, no one had successfully applied these procedures to permanently reverse a bishop's decision to suppress a parish and close its church. So this information is from Jim Corydon. Who may vindicate parish rights? The pastor, and this is all in canon law, okay? The pastor, others entrusted with the care of the parish are responsible, including pastoral administrators, parish finance and pastoral councils, and parishioners, okay? So if the pastor doesn't defend their rights, which very often they don't because it's politically troubling, any parishioner can do this, okay? So that's canon law. Some other things to consider in terms of vindicating parish rights. One is the common good. And in exercising their rights, canon law tells us, the Christian faithful, both as individuals and when gathered in associations, must take account of the common good of the church, of the rights of others, as well as their own duties towards others. This is sort of a balance. We have rights, but we have to consider about the common good. And in the end, the diocesan bishop has competence to regulate the exercise of rights which belong to the Christian faithful. That does not mean that the bishop can keep you from exercising your rights. That's why we have canon law. And so this whole battle for keeping parishes open is an exercise in the law, providing us ways to defend parish rights, okay? But it's also to acknowledge the legitimate leadership roles legally, okay? So the next thing from Father Jim Corydon is a shortage, and this is in canon law, a shortage of priests is not an adequate reason to suppress or combine parishes. And again, just as Deb has reiterated, canon law strongly recommends liturgies of the word, group prayer, in the absence of priests, that's canon 1248.2, clearly implying that the life and worship of the community must continue even when priestly leadership is absent. And I think that's really important. The life and worship of the community must continue. I mean, communities of faith are the body of Christ. We have a right to grow and worship and support one another in our Christian mission and outreach. Again, canons 516 and 517, just as Deb said, pastoral care may be trusted to others such as lay ministers or deacons. And this is just a few other canon laws about suppressing and combining parishes. A diocese presbyteral council, which is a body of parish priests whose function is to advise the bishop, must be consulted before any action is taken to suppress or merge parishes. About 30 years ago, 40 years ago, Cardinal Bernardin closed a parish in Chicago, and the parishioners appealed and won because he had failed to consult with the presbyteral council. Unfortunately, well, what he did is he just went back and consulted them and ended up closing the parish. But just so you know, there have been, anyway, this is a step. And also, this is equally important, those with rights or interests in the parish must also be consulted. This is why you are being asked to give feedback in Cincinnati to the Beacons of Light plan. The bishop is obligated under canon law to consult with those whose rights and interests are involved. So then Corrigan lists 4 kinds of lines of action to vindicate rights. Now this slide, I sent this to Deb and I didn't clarify it well, but the first 2 are encouragement and awareness, and the second line is direct appeal, conciliation, or mediation. The encouragement and awareness means, and Corrigan goes on at length with this, but the idea is we must be engaged. What are the facts? Is our parish, we must look at all the issues. We have to know our stuff. We can't just come in and say, well, I don't want to do this, but you haven't looked at the data. So the second line, the direct appeal, conciliation, and mediation, that is the hope to try to resolve locally the disputes around the parish mergers or closings with informal meetings with the bishop. And again, canon law always tries to get us to work this out directly. So one of the things that we'll have on the website is a letter to accompany anything people put on the Beacons of Light feedback page to Archbishop Schnur, just to say you don't agree with it. So that's sort of the informal process. So you want to try to do that informally first. Okay, so you don't get anywhere with that. Then you have to move into the next lines of action to vindicate rights. And this gets a little more complex. Don't worry too much. We've got extensive stuff, a thing called Canonical Appeals for Dummies that walks you right through it. But we'll just go through sort of what's involved. And this is administrative recourse. If your parish is merged or your church is closed and you don't agree, and you start the process within 10 days. And then this is if you're going to Rome after 30 days, the bishop doesn't answer, or he answers and says no. Then the canon 1732 to 1739 outline the legal procedures for appealing an administrative decision. So what happens? The bishop issues a decree or a public announcement. You get your letter in within 10 days. You wait for 30 days. If the bishop doesn't respond, then you take it to the congregation for clergy. Now, once it's a clergy, it can take years. And in the meantime, the bishop can go ahead and close your church, but he can't sell anything and he can't get rid of any of the goods. Technically in canon law, he's supposed to keep it open, but most of the time they don't. And that's another thing. So anyway, it can take years. So if you lose a clergy, the clergy may well, if it's a merger, if it's a church closure, the clergy may well uphold you. If it's a merger, that's unclear right now. And so then you can appeal to the signatura, which is the highest court in the church. But once you go to the signatura, you can't introduce anything new of substance. It can only show that the clergy made a mistake procedurally. I hope this isn't too technical. The last thing is ecclesiastical courts. These are courts in the diocese, like the marriage tribunal. They also have one for mediating disputes in the diocese, but they're largely unused. And I think so. And this ends this part of it. And I just want to reiterate, for those of you who have grown up with a lifelong respect for the leadership structures and governments in our church, as I have, just need to say that claiming and defending parish rights does not in any way denigrate the legitimate authority of church leaders or the communal nature of the church. These are our legal rights and responsibilities in canon law. Instead, claiming parish rights emphasizes the communitarian principle within the church and focuses on the church's true nature as a communion of local communities. This is straight Vatican II, okay? This is Church as a people of God. We are a community of communities. Now, very many times you wouldn't know it with how things come down, but this is in fact Vatican II. And so Corrigan concludes here that such claiming and working for parish rights is an authentic expression of the Catholic tradition. How are we doing?
Great.